The grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and flowing evening gowns. A man in a shabby suit stepped through the golden doors, clutching his young daughter's hand tightly. Whispers cut through the air like knives. Who could let him in? A waiter blocked their path. "Sir, this is a private gala." The guest chuckled over glasses of champagne. "He looks confused." "In the wrong place, buddy." The man's face flushed with shame. He turned to leave. Suddenly, a woman in a stunning gown ran off the stage. Her voice echoed throughout the ballroom. "Daddy." The entire room was frozen in shock. Meet Ethan Hale, 37, a single father. His hands tell his story better than any words. Calluses from loading trucks at dawn, stains from washing dishes until midnight, scars from weekend construction. His one suit hangs in a closet that has seen better days. The shoulders are frayed from too many job interviews, the fabric faded from too many desperate attempts to look presentable. But when he puts it on, his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, sees something different. "Daddy, you look like a superhero," she says every time her small hands smooth it. His lapels are accented with the seriousness of a royal tailor. Lily paints portraits of her father in this suit with her colorful masterpieces. He flies over skyscrapers, his cape billowing behind him. She sees no patches or frayed cuffs. She sees her hero returning home after saving the world through honest labor. Their apartment is small but filled with love. The walls are covered with Lily's artwork. Each drawing tells their story. In one, they are eating cereal for dinner because the electric bill was due. In another, they are dancing in the kitchen while rain trickles through the ceiling into a bucket. 2 years ago, everything changed in an instant. Sarah, Ethan's wife and Lily's mother, was driving home from her nursing shift when a drunk driver ran a red light. The ensuing hospital bills buried them deeper than grief. But Ethan promised Sarah he would give Lily everything she deserved, even if it meant working 3 jobs. He wears his father's broken pocket watch. The hand stopped moving years ago, but Lily calls it her lucky charm. She believes all their wishes are hidden inside, waiting. Now is the time to set them free. Time means nothing when there is love, Daddy. She tells him with the wisdom only children can derive. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Lily begged him to show her the beautiful lights downtown. A charity gala at the Grandview Hotel lit up the entire block. Ethan planned to pass by, let her look in the windows, maybe buy her a hot chocolate from a street vendor. But then a red balloon soared out of the hotel entrance. Lily chased after it, as if it were made of pure magic. Before Ethan could stop her, she followed it straight through the hotel's revolving doors. He had no choice but to follow her inside. Everything sparkled. Marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers that cost more than Ethan would earn in a lifetime. Women in designer gowns glided past like swans on a golden lake. Men in $1,000 suits discussed business deals over champagne that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. This was the world of Richard Lane, the billionaire philanthropist who owned half the city. His charity galas were legendary. Tonight's event was a fundraiser for children's hospitals, but the cost of a ticket could feed a family for months. Ethan read about Lane in newspapers left at the diner where he washed dishes. They said he'd built an empire from scratch, but now he lived in a tower so tall he'd forgotten what the ground looked like beneath his feet. What Ethan didn't know was that Richard Lane's daughter, Sophia, was watching from the stage. A reserved CEO who ran the family foundation with an iron fist and a heart of gold. She was about to change everything. The moment Ethan entered the ballroom, all conversation died away like the scratching of a record. His tattered suit stood out like a clump of weeds in a rose garden. Lily's small hand tightened on his, and everyone turned their heads. "Look, Daddy, it's like a fairy tale," Lily whispered, her eyes wide with wonder at the sparkling chandeliers and flowing dresses. But the fairy tale was about to turn into a nightmare. The woman in the pearl necklace leaned toward her companion. "Security must be letting down. How did they get in here?" Her voice carried louder than she intended, or perhaps she wanted it to. The man in the tuxedo snorted. "Today is an auction, not an adoption agency. Someone needs to tell him." Laughter rolled through the crowd like poison. Ethan's face flushed. He'd been rejected before, but never in front of his daughter. The hotel manager appeared like a shark smelling blood. His smile was sharp and cold. "Sir, I need to see your invitation." Ethan's mouth went dry. My daughter saw a hot air balloon, and it's a private event. $5,000 a plate. The manager's voice cut through the din of conversation. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. An even sharper whisper. 5,000. He probably won't make that much in a month. Look at that suit. A special offer from a charity. Someone calls security before he asks for a handout. An older man with a gold watch chain laughed coldly. Next thing he'll ask us to sponsor his little charity. Lily tugged at Ethan's jacket. Daddy, why are they so mean? The question hit him harder than any insult. He knelt down to be level with her. His voice was soft, despite the storm raging in his chest. Sometimes people forget their manners. Sweetheart, but we'll be leaving now. But those pretty lights, we can see them outside. As Ethan stood, a woman in a dress sparkling with diamonds blocked their path. Her smile was thin and caustic. You know, she said, loud enough for half the room to hear. There's a McDonald's down the street. Would suit you much better. The crowd burst into laughter. Cruel, joyful laughter that echoed through the room. The marble walls. Ethan felt smaller than he ever had in his life. Not because of himself, but because of Lily, who looked around with confusion and pain in her bright eyes. The photographer raised his camera with a predatory grin. This is going to be on the front page tomorrow. Don't forget to get that baby. Someone shouted. More laughter, more glances, more whispers that felt like needles in the skin. The security guard began moving through the crowd toward them, reaching for his walkie-talkie. The manager pointed at Ethan as if he were a target. Ethan scooped Lily up in his arms, holding her tightly to protect her from the violence. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, trembling. We're leaving, he said quietly. Good riddance, a woman in a pearl necklace murmured. Some people just don't know their place. But as he turned to leave, threading his way through a sea of designer dresses and disapproving glances, something extraordinary happened from the stage. Sophia Lane froze. Her speech notes scattered across the floor as she recognized a face she'd never forgotten, the face that had saved her life 8 years ago, the man who had carried her from a burning dorm. When she'd been just a sophomore in college, the man whose strong arms had pulled her from the smoke and flames while others had run the other way, the man who stayed with her until the ambulance arrived, holding her hand and telling her everything would be okay, the man she'd been searching for ever since Ethan Hale became her hero, her savior. The reason she was alive to stand on this stage in the hospital tonight. That night, delirious from smoke inhalation, she'd called out for her father, who was away, but Ethan had stayed by her bedside until she came to. Half conscious and grateful, she'd whispered, "Thank you, Dad," mistaking her savior for the father she needed in that moment. It became their secret joke during her recovery. She'd call him Daddy, and he'd laugh, saying she must have hit her head harder than they realized. Now, 8 years later, watching him be humiliated by people who weren't even worthy of shining his shoes, Sophia Lane made a decision that changed everything. She kicked off her designer heels and ran down the marble steps of the stage, her evening gown billowing behind her like liquid gold in the past. The stunned orchestra swept through the frozen crowd of society ladies, straight to the man who had given her a second chance at life. Her voice rang out across the ballroom, clear and powerful. Daddy. The effect was immediate. Every conversation died down. Every glass of champagne paused mid-dip to painted lips. Every cruel laugh died in stunned silence. The woman who had made the McDonald's comment stood open-mouthed. The photographer's camera tilted to one side. Richard Lane, watching from the head table, felt his blood pressure rise as his calm, professional daughter embraced the man in the hand-me-down suit. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Would you leave or stay and fight? Tell us what you would do below. Silence followed. Sophia's scream was deafening. The city's 500 most powerful people froze, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Their calm, untouchable CEO had just called a man in a thrift store suit Dad. What the hell is going on? Richard Lane's voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. He rose from the summit, his face frozen in confusion and barely contained rage. Sophia ignored her father completely, hugging Ethan around the neck. Tears streamed down her perfectly made-up face, ruining the makeup she had spent an hour applying. I can't believe it's you, she whispered into his shoulder. I've been looking for you for 8 years. Ethan froze, stunned by the sudden attention of hundreds of eyes. Lily clutched his leg, equally confused, but sensing that this woman was somehow important. Sophia. he said quietly, his voice trembling with emotion. You're Richard Lane's daughter? I don't care who she is, the pearl-clad woman hissed at her companion. This is obviously some kind of publicity stunt, but others in the crowd began to remember. Whispers began to spread through the room like wildfire. Wait, didn't she have an accident in college? Something about a fire. She was in the hospital for weeks. Sophia jerked her hands away, still clutching Ethan's, as if he might disappear again. She turned to face the crowd, her voice thick with the authority of 8 years at the helm of a billion-dollar foundation. I was once a sophomore at State University, living on the 3rd floor of Crawford Hall. Her voice grew louder with every word. On the night of November 15th, a fire started in the basement due to faulty electrical wiring. The smoke alarms malfunctioned. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the building was already filling with smoke. The ballroom was completely silent. Now even the waiters had stopped working. I was trapped in my room. The hallway was black with smoke. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die. Sophia's voice wavered, but she continued. Then that man broke down my door. She pointed at Ethan, who was shaking his head, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Ethan Hale carried me down 3 flights of stairs through smoke so thick I couldn't see my own hand. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know my family had money. He risked his life for a complete stranger because of who he is. Richard Lane's face turned pale. He remembered that night, that desperate phone call from the hospital, racing across the country to find his unconscious daughter, her lungs full of smoke. When I woke up in the hospital, Sophia continued, I was alone and scared. My father was returning from Tokyo, and my mother had already left. But Ethan stayed with me. He held my hand and told me I would be safe. She laughed through her tears, the sound bouncing off the crystal chandeliers. I was so disoriented from the smoke inhalation that I kept calling him Dad. He thought it was very funny. You must have hit your head harder than we thought, he said. But he didn't leave my side until my father arrived. The crowd was mesmerized. This was not the reserved and professional Sophia Lane. They knew this was a woman scarred by memories and gratitude during the 3 days it took me to recover. He was more of a father to me than she was. She glanced at Richard and then stopped. He was all I needed. I needed it more than anything. Ethan finally spoke. Sophia, I just did what anyone would have done. No, she said firmly, turning to face him. You didn't. There were 12 other people on that floor, 11 of whom got out on their own. One decided to come back for someone else. That was you. The woman who had mentioned McDonald's earlier looked as if she wanted to disappear into the marble floor. The photographer who had been so eager to humiliate them was now frantically photographing the reunion. But why? Richard Lane's voice was barely audible. Why didn't you ever tell me? Sophia turned to her father. Years of complicated emotions flashed across her face. Because I knew you would try to bribe him, offer him money, a job, anything to make you feel better. But Ethan wasn't looking for a reward. He didn't even tell me his last name. When I got out of the hospital, he was gone. She looked at Ethan again, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I hired private investigators. I searched social media. I tried everything. I wanted to thank you properly, to make sure you were okay, but it was like you were gone. Ethan's eyes filled with tears too. He had no idea she'd been looking for him. He thought she'd completely forgotten about the poor student who'd burst into her life on the most terrible night of his own. I had to drop out of school that semester, he admitted. My father got sick, and I had to work full-time to pay the medical bills. Then Sarah got pregnant with Lily, and life just went on as usual. Sarah, Sophia said tenderly. My wife, she died 2 years ago. Ethan's voice cracked on the words, which he still had trouble saying out loud. Sophia covered her mouth. Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. For the first time since this surreal evening began, Lily spoke. Her soft voice cut through the heavy silence. Papa says, Mama looks at the beautiful lights with the angels. Now those simple, innocent words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Several women wiped their eyes with expensive handkerchiefs. Sophia knelt down to be level with Lily, her expensive dress fluttering on the marble floor. Hello, dear I. Sophia, your dad once saved my life. Lily looked at her with the serious concentration only children can muster. Are you a princess? Do you have a princess dress? Sophia laughed, her laughter bright and genuine. I think I'm going to be one tonight. And you know what I think? Your dad is the bravest knight in the whole kingdom. The crowd watched, mesmerized, as their untouchable CEO sat on the floor in her $1,000 dress, utterly captivated by a 7-year-old girl in a grocery store dress. Richard Lane stood frozen in place, watching his daughter interact with the child of a man he'd never heard of, feeling like a stranger in his own life. Everyone in the room held their breath, sensing that everything was about to change. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and complete. The same crowd that had been jeering and laughing moments earlier now stood in stunned, shamed silence. Richard Lane slowly approached the group, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble with each measured step. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea, everyone holding their breath. As he approached Ethan, he paused for a long moment. The two men stared at each other, the billionaire and the struggling single father, two different worlds colliding in the space between heartbeats. "You saved my daughter's life," Richard finally said, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan straightened his shoulders. Any father would have done the same. "No," Richard shook his head slowly. "They wouldn't have done that. And I know this because for 30 years I was surrounded by people who wouldn't cross the street to help a stranger, let alone run into a burning building." He extended his hand. Ethan hesitated before taking it. "Thank you," Richard said simply. "Thank you for bringing her back to me." The crowd had begun to murmur, but it was different now. Instead of cruel gossip, there were murmurs of admiration and regret. "Did you see the way he carried his daughter? That suit may be old, but look how clean it is. That man has dignity. I'm terribly sorry about what we said." The woman in pearl jewelry stepped forward, her face flushed with shame. "Sir, I owe you an apology. What I said was unforgivable." Others joined the chorus of remorse, having learned a harsh lesson about judging others. But Sophia didn't stop. She stood gracefully, adjusted her dress, and walked to the microphone on the stage. Her heels clicked purposefully as she ascended the steps. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice came through the sound system clear and strong. "Tonight was supposed to be about charity, helping those in need." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Instead, we forgot the most basic rule of humanity. Treat others as you would like to be treated. This man," she gestured to Ethan, "embodies everything this gala should symbolize: selflessness, courage, love." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but listened. "8 years ago, he saved my life, not knowing who I was or what my family could do for him. Today, you treated him like a second-class citizen because of the suit he wore." Her voice rose with passion. "But let me tell you what I see when I look at Ethan Hale. I see a man who works 3 jobs to provide for his daughter. I see a man who has lost everything, but never lost his dignity. I see the kind of father every child deserves and the kind of man every woman hopes to find." The applause began slowly, hesitantly, and then grew into a deafening roar. People wept openly, now touched by the raw truth of her words. Lily tugged at Ethan's jacket. "Dad, why is everyone applauding?" Ethan knelt and pulled her close. "Because sometimes, darling, people remember how to be good." The photographer, who had so wanted to embarrass them earlier, approached, tears in his eyes. "Sir, I'd like to delete those photos I took earlier, and if you don't mind, I'd be happy to take some normal ones." That's the real story of tonight. As the evening went on, something magical happened. Walls came down. Rich and poor mingled, sharing stories and laughter. The charity gala found its heart. As the evening drew to a close, the crowd began to disperse, but the warmth lingered, like the glow of a candle after the flame had died. Richard Lane approached Ethan one last time. His face was softer than it had been all night. "I want to offer you a job," he said quietly. "Something worthy of who you are." Ethan shook his head gently but firmly. "Mr. Lane, I appreciate the gesture. I really do, but I don't need help. I just want a fair chance to take care of my daughter." Richard studied him for a long moment, then nodded with respect. "You're better than most, I know. If you ever change your mind, the door is always open." Sophia overheard the conversation and smiled. She knelt down next to Lily, who was unusually silent, taking in everything with wide, amazed eyes. "Lily, do you know what your dad gave me?" The girl shook her head. "He gave me my life back. And do you know what you gave me tonight?" She shook her head again, but Lily was clearly interested. "You showed me what true love is. The way you hold his hand, the way you look at him, as if he were the most important person in the world." "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Lily smiled shyly, reaching into her small purse and pulling out her father's broken pocket watch. She handed it to Sophia. "Papa says heroes don't need time to work because love remembers everything." Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she carefully handed the watch back to Lily. "Keep it, dear. Papa is right, and it belongs with its hero." As they prepared to leave, Ethan turned to address the moment that changed everything. His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly throughout the now peaceful ballroom. "I walked in here tonight feeling like I didn't belong, like these weren't my people and this wasn't my world." He paused, looking around at the faces that now looked at him with respect, not disdain. "But I've learned something important. Dignity isn't the clothes you wear or the money in your bank account. It's how you treat people when no one is looking and how you stand up for what's right when everyone is watching." He took Lily's hand and looked straight at the crowd. "My daughter will grow up knowing that respect isn't earned through wealth, but through love, kindness, and the ability to do the right thing, even when it's difficult." As father and daughter walked toward the exit, holding hands, the entire room began to applaud. The applause started slowly and then grew into a deafening and heartfelt explosion. Outside, in the soft light of the streetlights, Lily looked at her father. "Dad, are we rich now?" Ethan smiled and gently squeezed her hand. "We've always been rich, honey. We just forgot for a while." Subscribe if you believe that a real family is built on love, not blood.